Hey everyone, it's Nate, and this is New Compass Collectibles. It's time for another week of reviewing Heritage Weekly auction sales. We're going to be looking at comic book data from the auctions ending March 9th and March 10th, 11th. So that's the Sunday through Tuesday of last week's Heritage auctions. So let's go ahead and look at some of the data. Overall results from that auction, there were 1,220 items. That's a little bit higher than normal. Usually the results I've seen were under 1,200, so more items in this auction this week. 554,000 in total sales. Of those, there were 559 individual comics that I analyzed data for in this presentation. That represented $345,000 in total sales. And out of those 559 books, I was able to find comps to recent sales for 164 issues. So that's the data set that we're looking at this week. Those 164 comps, the average decline was 5.56%. That's a pretty significant drop. Previous weeks, we'd been seeing close to 3% consistently over the last 3 weeks or so. I think I've done this analysis. So 5.5% is a significant amount lower than those recent auctions that were seeing a 3% decline. That also shows in the strong and weak sales here. There were only 6 sales that had a 20% increase compared to its most recent sale, and 10 sales that were 20% below their most recent sale. Looking at the overall breakdown by comic age, we had close to 200 sales per Golden Age and Silver Age, $384 in average sale for the 189 Golden Age auctions. The Silver Age auctions had an average result of $264 per sale. Getting into the comps with the most recent sales here, this is comparing the auction result to the most recent sale that I could find in my data set. Items below the dotted line represent a weak sale. Results above the dotted line represent a strong sale. And we do have a mix, but you can see most are below the dotted line with an average result of 5.56% decrease. Another way of looking at that same sort of historical view of data is what would this auction catalog have been valued at in earlier weeks? So if this same auction catalog had gone up for sale in prior weeks, what would have been the sort of estimated catalog value at that time? And we can see that the peak would have been in June of 2022, and the auction result would have been around $280,000. That's what we would have expected based on recent sales of that time. And the results from this actual auction were, I think it says 137,000. The numbers are a little overlaid on top of each other, so we can't quite make out the number here. But that auction result from this past week is, the pink X on the right-hand side of the screen, and it's below the trend and around 130-something thousand for this auction catalog. These are all the sales by title in the auction from this week. 78 Amazing Spider-Man books, 18 Fantastic Four books, 15 X-Men books, and so on. Looking at this by age, there were only one title had more than 5 sales in the modern age, and that was Amazing Spider-Man. In the Bronze Age, again, Amazing Spider-Man is the top of the list here with 16 sales, 6 sales from the Avengers. In the Silver Age, a little more interesting, the highest selling book in the Silver Age was Showcase. And when I say book, I mean run. So a series of Showcase books were sold here for an average of $1,185. The second highest selling was Amazing Spider-Man with $402 per sale for the 56 sales that we saw here in the Silver Age. And lastly, the Golden Age books. I like to look at the Golden Age results in particular because the number of titles that gets represented here week to week does vary a bit more. In this week, we saw 8 books from Batman, 6 books from Superman, and 7 books from Firehair comics. So I'm going to focus on Firehair comics because that's one we don't see all that often coming up at auction. Batman and Superman we see all the time. The Firehair comic sales were an average of $288 per sale for those 7 sales. So not that high of a cost, but I do want to focus in on those since we don't see them that often here. Now, before we get to the Firehair Comics books, I did want to bring up just the showcase results as well, since those were the top of the Silver Age. If I just search the Heritage auction from this week and search it for the showcase books, most of these results are showcase. There's a few group lots here that are a mix of different titles, but you can see showcase number 1 here, showcase number 3. There was a large run of showcase books. Some of them were graded, some of them weren't. There were actually some that were in group lots as well. So showcase number 1 in a 7.0. There was showcase number 3. Then here's the big book, showcase number 4, first appearance of the Flash, selling for $6,000 in a 2.0. There's a showcase number 6, actually a pair of those, 2 different grades, a 6.0 and a 4.0. Also see a number 7, a number 8, showcase number 17, which is first appearance and origin of Adam Strange. Showcase number 20, number 30. So a pretty good run of showcase books here. Getting into some of the later titles, here is a group of 6, a group of 3, it looks like here. A few more in this auction. So there's a large run of showcase books available for anyone who is interested in collecting that particular run. But next is Firehair Comics. So Firehair Comics is an interesting one to me because it's part of the Fiction House titles. And I really like Fiction House in terms of their artistic style. They had one of my favorite artists doing a lot of their books, which was Maurice Whitman. It's interesting to see a lot of the Fiction House books because they do seem to have sort of a house style, regardless of who the cover artist is. They do seem somewhat recognizable to me after I've seen them, quite a bit in the auctions. Fiction House just stands out to me for some reason. This series I haven't paid as much attention to, but I was aware of it. So Firehair Comics number 1 from 1948, and we also see Firehair Comics number 2. But then it jumps to number 7, and I'm going to get into more of that in a second, but I was curious, sort of, was this a complete run of Firehair Comics, or someone that was a collector that was selling off their collection that had the whole series? But jumping from 2 to 7 was curious to me. I'm not really that familiar with the book. I just like the way that the colors are used in Fiction House titles. I just think the coloring, the inking on these covers is really unique. I can't put my finger on exactly how to describe it, but it just always seems to stand out to me when it's a Fiction House cover. The interesting thing, though, I wanted to find out more about this series, so I went to the Grand Comics database, searched for Firehair. What I ended up finding here is that Firehair was actually a feature. So if you look at the left-hand column here, you can tell if it's a series. That's like the actual name of the book. So Firehair was a series, but it also was a feature. This means it was a story within another title. And in this case, that feature, if we go to the issue checklist, that feature was a part of Rangers Comics, which is actually another Fiction House title. Firehair as a character and as a story was featured in Rangers Comics. So her actual first stories and first appearances were in Ranger Comics number 21. And also just to note here, this story, it does say it was reprinted in Firehair Comics number 1 in 1948. All of these features were reprinted later into the Firehair Comics that we see now being sold as like a collected edition of Firehair features. So that was something I wasn't aware of with this title. It turns out that if you go to Go Collect, I like looking at issues in Go Collect as well. There's a lot of different tools for looking at comic books and comic book history and data, and they all have their different uses. Go Collect, I like being able to look at all the covers from a single series sort of in sequence here. So this gives you the full picture of Firehair. Firehair Comics, it has number 1 and number 2 printed in 48 and 49. And then there wasn't another issue printed until 1951 when the numbering resumes at number 7. So there is no number 3 through 6. The complete series is actually here as 1, 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So that does in fact indicate that the entire series was available for sale in this auction. So if you are looking for a one-stop shop for Firehair Comics collectibles, you had your opportunity here in this Heritage Weekly auction. And not high prices for any of these books, right? So $192 for this 8.0, an 8.5 for $660. That was a pretty high price compared to the others. There's a 9.0 for $552. So if this was something that caught your attention, very easily accessible and affordable Golden Age books by comparison. A lot of times Golden Age is harder to collect, so this is one that you could maybe target. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that the artist was Lee Elias. So Lee Elias is well known for his work in pre-code horror as a horror artist, but actually did most of the interior art, pencils and inks for Firehair in these Rangers Comics features. So it's interesting to note that Lee Elias did this first story with Firehair as her first appearance, doing the pencils and inks there. So I was curious if he did the others as well. Looking through it, seems like he did most of the interior art for Firehair in all of these Rangers Comics feature stories, at least for the first part of that series. So he issued number 22, which was her second story, continuing through number 23. Again, Lee Elias here. So if you're interested in Lee Elias artwork, I would be curious to check out the interior arts from these, because I've only seen the covers of these Fiction House books. I haven't seen any Firehair interior art. That would be interesting to see. This was an interesting note I saw as well. So Rangers Comics number 28, again featuring Lee Elias artwork for this Firehair story. It's reprinted in Firehair Comics number 2, but there's a note here saying that Firehair's costume is altered from the original story to look less revealing. So I'm curious to see the difference in the interior art between the original Rangers Comics printing that Lee Elias put together that artwork for, and then the reprinted version that got toned down a bit. I'm curious what they did to that and how they modify it for the new audience in the reprint series. So that was just an interesting little tidbit. You get a lot of information from the Grand Comics database. It's a really good resource for history on comics if you want to sort of look into the past and see what the origins were of some of your favorite characters, or what other works your favorite artists have done. It's really a very comprehensive resource for comic book history. And that's comics.org is the website. Grand Comics Database is the name of the organization that puts that together. Okay, those were the results from this week. Those were the Heritage Weekly Auction results ending the week of March 9th. And hope you learned a little bit about Fiction House and Firehair Comics as well. Try to dig into one or two different books or titles as we see them come up through these weekly auctions. So I like looking at the data and seeing trends within the market, but I also like using them as a resource and an excuse to go back and look through some of the history of comics, as well as interesting things pop up in these auctions. So if you're interested in any of that, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share with the rest of the community. Comment below if you are aware that Firehair Comics debuted in Rangers Comics, not actually in Firehair Comics number 1, or if you knew that Lee Elias did her interior artwork. Are there other famous artists in the history of comics that have like a notable association with a lesser, more obscure character like that? I was not aware of Lee Elias working for Fiction House at all, never mind being sort of the primary artist on Firehair, who of course is not a well-known character these days, but it was interesting to find that relationship digging through the history of comics there on the Grand Comic Database. So fun little thing that I learned this week. I hope you enjoyed it as well, and join me again for future videos here on the channel.